we on? Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability, and I am Satya Sankaran. Our guest today is Shama Karkal. She has spent more than 2.5 decades in the health and social development space. Shama has worked closely with urban and rural communities in India on health and social development since 1996. She has earned her master's degree from the School of Social Work, University of Maryland, Baltimore in the USA, with a focus on management and community organizing. She has specializations in strategic nonprofit management from Harvard Business School and public policy from Takshashila Institution. As its CEO, Shama has been representing Swasti Health Catalyst at the Asia Pacific Alliance for Sexual and Reproductive Health and has been the chair of the steering committee. Her most recent efforts at establishing COVID Action Collab during the pandemic has been noteworthy to say the least. It brought a wide variety of organizations working together into a collaborative. She is a systems thinker and she works at the intersection of health, community, finances, and technology. And that is going to be appropriate for our discussion today. Welcome to the show, Shama.
Thanks very much, Satya. Very happy to be here.
Let me lead with this question. Are people in our cities healthy?
I guess a great way to get started. And I wish I had a straight answer for you. What I can tell you is probably two things. I don't think we have an overall measure for health in itself, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. But I think the challenge is that we don't have a measure for overall health. And therefore, we can't say all people in the city are healthy or city itself is healthy. And then the second piece is that through our surveys, etc., we do get information about um, various parameters related to health and socioeconomic factors. And what we can say that those with better resources are healthier, and those without the resources are not as healthy. And I think that is the fact of our cities, right? They're not as equitable as we'd like.
There is this distinction between private health and public health and how they relate to each other because the public health is the collective health of people is what defines how healthy the city is going to be and what kind of things are going to be. Just help me explain health to the people, right? What
Yeah,
does
no,
health
I'm glad
comprise
you.
of really?
No, I'm very glad you brought up this question, and it's something that I dwell on a lot, or I work on and discuss a lot. And I think two things, especially when you bring it up in the context of public and private health, that itself has separate meanings. So I'm going to first zoom out to what health in itself is, right? And I think if you look at the WHO definition of what health is, it's talking about complete physical, mental, and social well-being, right? But unfortunately, and I asked my 9-year-old a couple of years ago when he was 9, and I asked my son, what is health? And he says, hospitals and doctors. And I said, oh God, we seem to have lost the plot. So I think, unfortunately, most of us, when we think of health, we're thinking of illness and being illness free. But that's actually not at all what health is about. If you look at the large definition of saying physical, emotional, social well being, then there's a lot that goes into keeping us healthy. And if you then were to talk about what is public health as a discipline or an area of work, and that is actually about preventing people from getting sick or ill, right? I think those two things are, and like many other things, we have a way of breaking things down and using language. The public health and private health that a lot of people are talking about comes down at the level of sickness care, right? And where we're talking about who provides care for people when they're ill or unwell. Versus public health as a discipline, which is about many, many things of preventing people from getting sick. And actually, in that context, I think what your podcast does in terms of talking about the urban environment is very relevant because a lot of that is about health in all policies and therefore health for all. Right? And so, for example, I think something you work on a lot and have worked on a lot, Satya, in the past is just urban mobility, right? And we know for a fact that if people are moving, on their legs, especially, or cycling, they are likely to be, in better shape, and therefore able to prevent sickness and illness, right? And so I think the fact that that is something in an urban context is very important. Is not only important from just an urban mobility point of view, but I think from a urban health perspective is extremely important.
So let's get to the physical, mental, and the social parts of health
Social.
that you're talking about. If you say preventing sickness is the role of the government in general, and that is where public health is, who then handles the physical, mental, and the social part? How do I view this distinction between that their role and my individual goal to be able to not just be physically healthy but also mentally and socially healthy? What does it mean to me?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, brilliant question, right? So, and I think the way to look at this is public health is therefore about promoting and protecting the health of all people, and the community, right? And I think where we live, and I think this is where local government becomes even more important, because there are different kinds of government. And so therefore we're talking about a safe place to live, learn, work, play, and we're talking about promoting and protecting our health, right? So when we talk about, interestingly, when we talk about government, and including local government, city governments, I think it is about quality of life, right? And
Mm.
therefore, then everything that the different parts of the government come into play. And we may not think about government like that. But for
Mm.
example, it is not just about the facilities that provide care, which are healthcare providers and definitely part of the health, but it is also about housing. It is also about transport. It is also about the environment, right? It is also about water. It
Mm.
is about sanitation. It is about food. So actually, it is all of government which is working. It is about safety, right? If people are not feeling safe and are not able to move around, you can't have a good quality of life. So therefore, it is actually very interdepartmental or across all government departments when we're talking about the kind of health that we all actually aspire for and wanting to work with. And so therefore I think government plays a very, very significant role, and all government departments and definitely local government plays a very strong role. And one of the things that, I mean, I want to emphasize, because you brought this up and I believe it's very important, is the whole role of people and communities, right? I think we have a especially in the context of government, we always see that somebody has to provide for somebody else, or somebody else thinks for somebody else. But I think the big part of what we see and we recognize as being very important is the participation of people in all of those processes. So if you look at healthy cities, and by the way, there is a whole campaign that WHO has had for 40 odd years now, looking at healthy cities in themselves, right? Participation of people is a critical aspect of staying healthy, being healthy, and creating or co-creating those environments that enable better health for all of us. And I think that's very, very important. We don't look at it that way. We look at it as service provision one side and somebody else uses it. But I think looking at people's participation in various ways at various levels is a big part of what we talk about when we talk about public health in healthy people and healthy cities.
I somehow believe that the government, it's easy for them to deliver this hard infrastructure. So, building hospitals, putting doctors, delivering the sickness care becomes easier for people to do. But it's interesting you bring up communities before we go into healthy cities and tie it to the government. How exactly should communities involved in? What does it mean that the community should step up and take care? How are we supposed to gather ourselves? What kind of community are we talking about? And when you're talking about communities, I also know that there are a lot of nonprofits working in the healthcare space. Is the civil society itself, how do you see that playing? What is the role of community in health?
So I think, I mean, typically when we think of families or people, we're thinking of individuals and families, right? And I think we forget community as an sort of an intermediary or an in-between level, because as individuals and families, we are able to do something which is perhaps within our realm of control. But I think as when we think about communities, whether we think about it as residents of a local neighborhood, or residents of a city, right, or ward or constituency, or we talk about people who have cyclists at a community, right, because you have a certain passion. So there are different ways in which we can look at community, and I think as community we all are able to exert collectively more effort than we are as individuals or individual families. Right? And why is that important? It is important because we influence the way things can be done or things are done. Right. Again, I'm going to take an example of today Bengaluru is like a running capital. I have people who come to me and say, oh, we didn't realize there are so many running events, right? And there is something happening pretty much throughout the year. And what does that do? That creates a certain environment. It motivates others to come in and get involved. There is a whole set of organizations working around running in itself, right? Some run it like a business because people pay, and so there's an economic aspect to that. And there are people who run it as a non-profit where the money that they make actually goes back into, say, education for children or something else. Now, am I saying running is the only thing for health? No, but it has a health angle to it, right? You're increasing movement, and being active is a very important piece of being physically active is a very important part of actually staying healthy. And there's evidence, right? The more active you are, the more physically active you stay, or overall health will improve in the long term. So now the question of how does a community function in these kinds of contexts is the pressure that it exerts. So there's an economic angle to it, there's an environmental angle to it, and that community together itself will behave differently, right? You will see, I mean, I think all of us who are part of running groups or cycling groups or other groups will see that there is a behavior. So if it is citizens working together for a cleaner neighborhood, you will see that they will all be far more aware, will not only aware of what is going on in their cities, but they will sort of push their neighbors and other people in their areas to not do certain things or to do certain things in a certain way. So I think we don't recognize the value of community often enough, but it really is. I mean, I think, let me go back to the pandemic times, and I think what community did was actually exemplary, right? In apartments, it was the Resident Welfare Association, which is another form of community, which actually took care of the elderly and, tracked who was living alone and made sure they had groceries. We had in other neighborhoods, we knew that there were people tracking those who are ill or, needed to get to assistance, and they set up ways locally to actually respond. Right. So whether in illness times or from an activity perspective, there are various community or citizen initiatives which are very important and do influence the way things are working in a context, in any context. I mean, it works in rural as well, but definitely in an urban context, and has links to both the environment, to the economy, and to the way we all behave as a community.
That's very interesting. So the social influence factor is what brings the community together. But let's address the non-profit angle as well, because if the
Sure.
government is expected as a part of their role to look at public health,
Mhm.
education, health, the defense is some of these key things that the government is supposed to do as a part of it.
Yeah.
Why are there so many non-profits? Second part of that question, maybe you can answer them together, is
Mhm.
health itself is a state subject, but we see the central ministry of health doing a lot more than the states. And you mentioned local government, right?
Mhm.
The city government, and at that level as well, but I don't see that happening as well, other than just maintaining phcs and delivering the bare minimum required. There seems to be a lot more happening, schemes coming out and things like that at the central government. The state is doing certain things, I don't know what it is, and the most visible thing you see is the city government and the phc. But considering your definition of health and the way it needs to be, this seems like a large ecosystem of something that I can't put my hands on in the urban space. I look in the city and I don't understand where is health in this thing. How do we
Yeah.
unpack this?
No, so I mean, I think that is a struggle for many of us, right? It is a very, very large ecosystem if you're talking about health as an outcome for all our people, and it becomes easier then for people to break things down and work on parts, because that's always easier, right? And that's really why we also have the kind of fragmentation, I believe, right? Because we say, I will do this part and somebody else will do that part, but then we become siloed, and we become siloed, and we don't actually look at, hey, even if you're working separately, at somewhere this all needs to come together, and therefore this is the big picture. And that is honestly the challenge of some of our large issues, whether it's education, whether it's health, and many other things, including the environment today, right? But I think the two questions. So let's address the civil society piece, right? Just like the market, right? Wherever the market sees an opportunity, the market goes in and will take that up, right? And I think it's the same with people. When we recognize that, hey, this is the way that we think the world should work, and government is doing its part, but it's not enough, and we need to play a role, we play that role, right? And not all problems can be solved only from a market lens, and obviously government is already working to solve it to the best that the way they see it. So I think civil society comes in to say, how can we address this differently, right? So for example, if community participation is not a strong component, and it typically isn't when you look at the market or the government, then civil society creates those spaces for people to participate and push for people's participation, create opportunities where people can use that space. So I look at civil society as another way that the larger community, larger society is actually working with government and with the private sector, with the market, to actually change the way or work together to achieve health and well-being, right? Why are there so many organizations? Because I don't think everything can be done by just the market or the government, and so people will get involved. And that's my take on why there are so many civil society organizations. I see panchayats as a way of people participating, right? Is civil society participation. It may not be an organization, but it is still a civil society process. Similarly, ward committees, right? And so we have some more which come from a governance point of view, but there are others, like I mentioned, RWAs before, or other clubs and groups, the Rotary, many ways in which people organize, come together, and try and address what they see as being a gap in the way the world currently works today. So that's sort of my take on civil society. If we were to come to in a city context, to look at health, right? Like I said, the determinants of health and good health are several, but typically you will see that most municipal corporations have some health-related work that they do. Right, and in cities which are capitals, and also state capitals, etc., this gets a little murky in the sense that you can't tell really what is made available through the corporation, what's available through my state, and what's coming from, say, the center, which you mentioned earlier. But in smaller places, whether they're smaller towns and cities or even in rural areas, that distinction is easier because the numbers are smaller, right? Cities tend to have a lot packed in from all forms of government and all of the market, let's say the private sector. And of course, then there are civil society players as well who are also offering services. So it can be very confusing to navigate that. Right now, if you were to look at the urban context, from a pure healthcare access point of view, the city corporations will have some level of care provision. In the city, you'll see, for example, in Bengaluru, you'll see BBMP clinics, right? We used to have primary health care centers, which is a national program. And now they are called health and wellness centers. And you'll see in different parts of the city that primary healthcare centers are being upgraded to being health and wellness centers. We have, of course, additional initiatives like in Karnataka, you're seeing the launch of Namma clinics in the city, and that's an effort to go even closer. So health and Namma clinics are sort of lower than or sub to the health and wellness centers. They're below the health and wellness centers and are intended to be closer to people, more within the community, within the neighborhood, and making certain healthcare services available. And of course, then you have the network of outreach, which is typically in the rural areas, it's called ASHAs, and in urban areas, they're called USHAs. These are your urban social health activists. Who are to engage with the community and identify needs and challenges, and also enable the health department services to reach people, right? So that would be and of course, then you have the district facilities in a city. Our large hospitals, both from the public side and then you have the private side, make it a little bit confusing to understand which one is at what level. But that's typically you have a sub center or a Namma clinic, you have a primary healthcare center or health and wellness center as they're known now. You have the CHC, the community health centers, which is one level above. Then you have the district hospital. That's the sort of a facility hierarchy, so to speak, in a general context. Cities, yes, can be more confusing.
And I'm just surprised that they even added wellness to this. This kind of says that they're at least, going
Yes.
beyond just removing diseases, right?
Oh,
Do
of
you see
course.
that attitudinal shift across? You worked across the country. You worked in many
Yes.
cities and many places. Are they all, how are they placed? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Which cities do
Yeah.
you see progressing better, uh, thinking differently, adding wellness in their name?
No, so the health and wellness centers is across the board, is across the country, right? Actually, I want to say that our national health policy, which came out in 2017, is very progressive, right? It is talking about wellness. It is talking about achieving health for all people, in helping people achieve their potential. I think it's huge in what a policy statement says, right? But we also know that from policy to implementation takes time and takes effort, and that is where I feel the effort is not just by the government. It requires both the private and the people to be working with the government in achieving that sort of vision that we have in the national policy statement. So, health and wellness centers is the direction, because that is the policy direction broadly for the country. And health and wellness centers do, for example, for Yoga Day, will have yoga programs, are meant to look at other aspects in the community. So, the aim is to get broader and address all of these issues. I think to me, one of the challenges is that it is still a little more facility and public health, well, let's not say public health, a health department focused effort. It still needs a little bit more interdepartmental, or what is typically used in the world. I mean, the language is convergence, right? More departments working together, because that's how things will add up more, right? So and again, to give you a point, wellness in terms of yoga, exercise, bringing community together, all important. But basics of, say, housing or good quality food, did I mention water already? So
Yeah, yeah.
these are things which are outside of health and wellness centers, right? But they're very large determinants of quality of life and whether you actually have good life. And then, I mean, I think now with climate change, everybody's talking about it, but we have known for a very long time that an urban area is not equitable, right? Some of
Hmm.
us live in very good neighborhoods, some of us live in urban slums. And if you live in a slum and you're living on top of a drain, your quality of life is affected simply because of where you're living, right? So I think those are other aspects which are outside of the health department, outside of what is possible through health and wellness centers, and where the need for convergence, joint working, working with civil society and private sector, etc., comes into play. And I honestly think urban planning is a actually part of a public health discipline, because how you
That's
plan a
nice.
city and how you run it is going to affect the health of everyone in that city, right? And remember, it's not just the physical health, right? Whether I can get to work easily, I come back and I have space to run, play. Those are all important determinants of my quality of life and how much I'm able to achieve my full potential.
That link between the quality of life and hence planning and then looking forward into the health is such a powerful correlation.
Of course, and to the point that you were making about sort of healthy cities, what cities are good, etc. Right? I think right now, and I mentioned the healthy city campaign earlier.
Hmm.
It's a WHO. driven campaign for multiple decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's a campaign that's run across the world. In the sense, you have cities globally across all the different regions that are working to achieve. And remember, being a healthy city is not a one-time status, right? I mean, I can clean the road and say this is the cleanest road or the cleanest city, and we do have clean cities in India. But healthy cities is a journey, right? I can never say we've achieved and we're done, because it's an evolution. But nonetheless, there are many cities who've been on that journey and been on that journey for multiple decades. What is disappointing is that we don't have cities in India so far who are on that journey. I've been working with one city to get them started on that journey, and that is the city of Bhopal. And that journey is about saying, how do we look at an urban context and not plan just for, say, infrastructure, which you mentioned earlier, right? Which is perhaps about housing, building, roads, many other things. But how do we actually think about people and their lives in the context of the city? What is it going to require? Can we create a vision and then all work together with participation of people in the private sector and the government and start that journey? So we have clean cities. We have those lists that get announced every year, but we don't yet have cities that are rated in India or measure themselves on saying we're trying to get healthy in the largest definition of that health possible.
That brings me to the question of measure that you answered in the very first question, which is what does it take to put a measure in place? How are they rating clean cities? Is probably a little easier because you just have to measure how much dirt there is. I'm just being simplistic, but I'm just saying, how do you just in health? What do you say? Do you say if there are no diseases, you're healthy, or no? But now we have to measure mental and social. How do we
Exactly.
even proceed on the track of measuring health and then
Yeah.
relate it back to all the things you said? Good infrastructure, not having drains with dirty water flowing in it, having clean roads and not having stagnant water which gives you malaria. Let's talk about the measure. Are there any, how do you get around to
Okay.
measuring this?
Yes, yes. Okay. So, I mean, and this is in the context of health and public health, sort of a debated subject. Again, a lot of people have done a lot of research on can you measure quality of life, right? So, there are actually ways to measure quality of life. The quality of life measurement is actually has very little to do with disease, right? So yes, morbidity, disease prevalence, all of that important. I'm not trying to say they're not important, but they're only one aspect of what is quality of life. It's very interesting. You can have people who are, living with a condition, but actually feel that everything is good in their life, right? So just having a condition or having something else doesn't mean that your quality of life deteriorates. Whereas you can have somebody who's actually doesn't have any condition or a disease, but actually feels miserable because of other things in their life. So this quality of life measure actually does exist. It's not used enough. Right. It's one of the things that my organization is also pushing for, is to say, how do we look at a quality of life measure versus just measuring for mortality or morbidity, things like that. So that's one piece. I think the second piece is, how do cities measure? Because you can look at
Hmm.
population level measures, etc. But how do cities measure this? Because like we saw, or like we discussed, there are many things that come together when we're talking about a city and talking about healthy city. So what is interesting is, just earlier this year, or I think either end of 2022 or beginning of 2023, because there has been so much work by some cities over multiple decades to talk about healthy cities, there are now indicators, or at least a set of indicators, that cities can start to measure to actually say, am I heading in that direction, right? We assume that there's no achieved status because you can keep improving, but at least is there a way for me to measure? And so there was a list of about 53 indicators that were put out. There is a paper
Hmm.
that's available, and to measure whether a city is healthy or not, right? And that's one of the things that, again, like I mentioned, I'm working on healthy cities, and Bhopal is the city that we're working on. We've come up with a set of indicators because we wanted to make sure that it was adapted for the Indian context and our current realities. So actually from the 53 that is in this paper, we have now expanded that to about 60 indicators. And those are indicators that we will look at current data on and hopefully keep measuring over time. And the idea is that eventually we will actually see progress against all those indicators. So it won't, because it is so many things. And again, just to give you an example, for Bhopal, we're looking at food, right? We're looking at water and we're looking at sanitation. We're looking at the environment, and the environment pillar is actually sort of a large pillar because it includes safety, law, it looks at public spaces, looks at the built environment, looks at many aspects, industrial waste, for example, all of those aspects which come into the environment. Of course, transport was part of it. And then you have the last pillar, which is individual and family health, right? So now across these, we have indicators, and we're working to actually put out a status report. Hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have that status report across these indicators, and then be able to measure the work that happens over the next few years to see whether there is progress against all the other indicators. So not a simple thing, but possible to do if cities make up their mind to do it.
I can understand the complexity in this kind of measurement because there are so many parameters, like you said, that directly and indirectly contribute to health. I've been saying many people as well, right? Like simple things like people tell me, why do I have to cycle when I can buy a electric vehicle, motor scooter, and I am saving you on the pollution? But then I come back and say, yes, you are, but here's a small health quotient that you might get additionally benefited because of doing that extra activity or walking to a place, walking half a kilometer to your bus stand or whatever it takes, 200 meters, getting those short trips on in more active mobility modes. This is one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, is so much of work happening around the preventive part of things and not just the clinical. Our focus on is mostly on the clinical.
Yeah.
And but tell me about the preventive part of things, right? All of these things in the city that make you more active, that create more movement, like you said, and possibly having cleaner surroundings and having a cleaner city. uh, there must be some way of, I know that might not be measured, but there has to be some way of measuring every little good quality of life that you bring has X amount of impact on your health, not just for the people who have the resources, like you said, but
But for
even
everyone.
for people who don't have access to resources.
Absolutely. And I think that from a healthy city construct, from a concept, I think having that equity, that equitableness in a city context, because what we've seen is that in urban areas, if you look at who has the poorest health, it tends to be the lowermost socioeconomic strata that has the poorest health. And actually, in an urban context, they actually have worse health than even their rural counterparts, right? So we know that people who live in urban slums or lower socioeconomic strata, the migrants, etc., their health, they would actually, in terms of an health, purely from a mortality morbidity point of view, they would be better off in a rural area. So I think equity in a health in a city context is extremely important. And when you were talking about the cars and when we were talking about the health, I mean, again, just a couple of things to keep in mind, right? If you look at, there is now data to indicate, or there's enough information, evidence to indicate that, food and exercise are sort of critical factors to human health and longevity. And I think the next big thing, of course,
Mm,
now we're talking about is the climate, right? As heat increases, you're going to
mm,
see an adverse impact on human health. And we are all here in South Asia, parts of Asia, going to see that increase in heat. We've seen this has been the hottest year in history, I think, right? So the environment, food, mobility, being able to move around physically are critical. They're critical not just from physical health, but remember that going out and being in the sun is very, very good for your emotional health and well-being as well. Being able to be outside with people and in things that you are actually able to enjoy, right? Whether that is a street theater performance or a music program or something else, are not just physically important, they're important for your emotional well-being. It's important for your connectedness and contribution. So again, I think when we talk about healthy cities, and we have a position paper on it, again, I'll be happy to share that with you. You look back over history, and culture and heritage becomes a big piece of that as well, right? And I think oftentimes in a city context and health, those are not aspects that we look at or consider important, but they are very important to creating not just health from a physical health point of view, but the broadest sense of health, and definitely from a well-being perspective, very, very. So I think equity, and equity for all of these aspects, right? Why should some people have more access to culture, heritage, or public spaces or parks? Actually, one of the conversations that I was having with a few weeks ago and has stayed in my head is that, while we have a lot of green parks and a lot of walking tracks, we don't have enough playgrounds for our children. And not having enough playgrounds for our children is a big both social, emotional, and physical aspect in the future that we're going to see it being a detriment, right? And to not consider that when we are designing our cities, I think we're being myopic, right? We keep increasing the sizes of our homes and decreasing the size of our playgrounds. And actually, I think playgrounds are far more important than the size of our homes. So
I agree with you. And those few parks that we have are also gated, locked, excluded for a lot of people. Out of the three parks I have in my neighborhood, one of it has a temple, and the other one has been built up into a library and a community center. And there's only one left, which a club or something keeps it locked all through the day. You just have to look at it from the outside. I think we are doing a tremendous amount of disservice in the public space.
you were talking about impact, right? If you were to, and on your podcast, I've had the privilege to listen to some people. I wanted to bring up this. I mean, two facts that I want to share with you, right? One, Tokyo does feature as a healthy city, right? And Tokyo has come up on your podcast before, so I just had to place that there. The fact that people are walking around, you get better mobility. And they have small houses, but that doesn't seem to be affect the quality of life. So if you are talking about health, and I enjoyed that, and this is something that I wanted to connect this episode with all your other episodes, is Tokyo does feature in the top 5 healthy cities, right? Number one. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is a couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Mubin Syed. He was at TEDx Bangalore here, and what I took away, and something that I hadn't probably, despite my years of work in public health, recognized, was that as South Asians, we just need far more physical activity than is even recommended globally, right? I think we say 150 to 180 minutes per week of physical activity is the standard. And you'll have to watch Mubin's video to understand why. But I think for the South Asian population, it's probably double, right?
Very interesting.
Which just means that what you were just saying about physical mobility, being walking around, is critical for us, right? So to me, I mean, when I look at cities, the idea of 15-minute cities or livable cities has to have the ability to get people walking around and getting and moving around, and not driving around. And of course, we know that the driving has many other challenges, but I think the simple fact that if you are physically doing things, going out for grocery shopping, right, walking around to play, going to do your normal chores, and you're doing that because you can walk around. But our cities are not designed for that, right? Our sidewalks are too narrow, crumbling. Most people, even when they're walking in the mornings, are not in the parks, they're walking on the roads, right? And those are, I think, honest challenges. And if we are talking about India being a diabetes capital and things like that, and again, now very narrowly looking at it from a disease perspective, movement, mobility, and then your food are critical determinants of that, right? And I don't think we do enough on that, honestly.
I agree with you. And now this is the link that is very interesting, is we don't appreciate these linkages between health and how we build our cities and how we are asking for our facilities in the public commons. Too often than not, we treat it's like your physics, chemistry, math biology kind of a thing, right? You think they're subjects, but in life they are all one and the same.
Linked, of
They
course.
appear in all of
Yes.
us. So we may have divided for administrative purposes into health and city corporation and whatever, right? The water body, and but in a city they are all together and they have an influence on each other. And every time we have a talk about our public health or personal health, and we are not healthy, and it is directly correlated to how your city is and how you behave in it every day. If you build a city for motor vehicles and just consumption and just with more and more work becoming sedentary, of course you're going to be susceptible to a different set of diseases that are coming in and different types of health
Yep.
parameters. But this brings me to the question around the uh, what the market is doing, right? We've basically seen, at least from where I sit, I can see a lot of hospitals and health centers and gyms. What do you see is the role of uh, the market in promoting better health? Are we getting away from less junk being sold, and our cities going to get better by these kind of things? What's your opinion?
Okay, so yeah, I wish there was a straight answer to that. But like I said earlier, the market does play a role across all of these aspects, right? So if we were talking about healthcare provision from a clinical treatment perspective, what we know is, of course, that secondary and tertiary care, which is where you talk about hospitals, and in healthcare we talk about primary care, primary, secondary, tertiary. So again, a tiering that happens there. A large part of the private sector is in the secondary and tertiary care.
Hmm.
Obviously, there is money to be made, or there is business value there, right? Preventing illness, uh, and I think we all know these WhatsApp forwards, right, where we say a pedestrian doesn't even buy a cycle and a cyclist doesn't add to the economy, right? So preventing illness actually has no business case in the market side of things, right? And I'd love to be corrected if there are um, private players who are actually talking about preventing illness, but a majority of them are in the secondary and tertiary care, which is when once people are sick, we will take care of you, absolutely essential. But that's where a large part of the private sector is. They're also in now technology and diagnostics and pharmaceuticals, of course. And like you said, in nutrition, there's a lot because, of course, we have problems with soil quality and what's happened over decades of the quality of our soil. So therefore, given that probably our food is not as nutritious as it could be, we have the whole supplements industry and nutrition, etc. So of course the private sector takes a large part in that, right? And I think when it comes to, of course, water, we know that there is a whole range of the market that plays in water, whether it's when our pipes and taps run dry, to have tankers which come and supply the water, to the bottled water, and now all kinds of sparkling flavored and what other kinds of water. So I think the private sector is everywhere in many aspects of what affects our health, of course in infrastructure as well. So and I wouldn't get into that, right? But I think the market does have a strong role to play, must play a role from not just a business or a profit making side of it, but where are we actually headed in terms of human health, planet health today, right? Because I think we see the private sector, which is interested in looking at their value chains, their supply chain, and saying what can we do differently. And that's very, very important. Definitely on the agri side and the food side of things. I think, is junk decreasing? No, unfortunately not. I think there are very active lobbies to try and prevent people from understanding what is right and what is wrong, right? I think the more your food is processed, the more problematic it is. That's just the thumb rule. And we need to have less processed food. But that's not, again, something the private sector or the market is
Yeah.
going to say, because that's an economic engine. But I think more locally grown, less processed food is better for us. And I think that's, oftentimes where the civil society and the government comes into play. That role
Mm.
is of information enablement, creating the understanding that there are ways to do this, but we need to be doing it differently. I don't see enough yet willing private sector saying that we will change the way we do our business, because there is harm being done to society and to people. And I'd like to see more of that happen, of course. Definitely when it comes to food, right? I mean, I think
Yeah,
one
definitely.
thing that needs to change immediately is TV channels that, sell junk to our children. I cannot believe that it has not happened. But the fact that we're pumping so much processed foods and sugar into our children, uh, yeah. I mean, adults at least have the opportunity to understand when we make choices, but children are easily influenced, don't understand, and will go simply by taste. And I think that is a problem.
This is the civil society role as well, right? I see a lot of private individuals now on video. Somebody saw someone is going around reading labels and telling them what is the truth, right? The same thing with I keep telling, we're eating carrots thinking there's some vitamins in that. I don't even know how much of it is there and how much of it is just pesticides. We aren't testing our vegetables enough to know that what we think is there, is it really there, right? And reading nutrition labels and making them, more aware of how to read. There's a lot we can do on the health side, personal health, and community behavior on public health. This is a absolutely stunning conversation. Uh, it just opened my eyes. I'm not somebody who understands the health space other than personal health, of course, but I do know that on the public health side, a lot of focus is on the clinical part of things and very less on the preventive part of things. And the distinction you drew for me between how your cities are laid out and how you behave in your public commons is also correlated very directly to both personal and public health. Where you live and how you live matters to how this thing you are. But parting thoughts on how you see this going forward, is measurement going to be key? Are defining those parameters uh, help drive cities to do better public health on more range of parameters? Or do you think there's more to be done by civil society and markets? Where do you see this playing out in the short and the long term?
Definitely measurement is going to be key, but I think measurements will not be the only thing, simply because we can measure forever, but if unless there's action around what we're measuring, we're not going to change anything. So I think the biggest areas of work are going to be one around multiple departments working together in a city context, right? Is saying, how do we not lose the plot? Like you said, everybody
Mhm.
starts working on pieces, but are these pieces coming together and making sense at a city level? And that is where, of course, measurement will tell us whether we're in the right direction, where we have to course correct. But I think the piece of all of us working together, having that larger view, is going to be key. I think the whole, governance conversation, and you've had this on your show as well, with people's participation, is very, very important to me. I think the moment you have active ward committees, for example, the right kind of questions will start to emerge, right? Why are we doing or not doing? And those questions, and then that action has to move up to the city level as well. So I think um, uh, public health is at that intersection, and better health and well-being is at the intersection of multiple things. So those multiple things have to work together, look at that big picture, with action both at the city all the way down to ward, and requires your favorite Samaj Sarkar and Bazaar to come together. It's not going to happen just by one or the other. So
On that note, Shama, thanks very much for coming on the show and showing us the light, so to speak, or the health. Uh, we hope that we can somehow make our cities more livable and more healthier. And hopefully, using some of the measures you're going to put together to do the same. This is a reminder to everybody else to like, subscribe, and share.